Well, good afternoon, Youth Specialties audience. I'm excited to be here with you guys today, and I'm excited for our special guest here, Kay Warren. Kay, good afternoon. How are you doing there in California?
Hey, Mina, we are doing well. We are sweltering. We're like at
You should be.
97. We don't know what to do with heat, though. It throws us off.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. I guarantee it is still beautiful there, though, compared to here in Atlanta, where it really is hot and sweltering this afternoon. Well, thank you so much for your time. And I told you this earlier, that, man, I've read this now twice because I've interviewed you now twice, too.
Yeah.
And someone asked me this other day, or they said, well, mine was the first time like not good enough. I said, I think it was, but I don't know.
It was wonderful. Maybe, you did a great job.
I said, maybe God thinks I need to read again, though, to get some stuff out of it. So it's a great book, Kay. It really is. I've read it twice. My wife has read it too as well, and we just enjoy it. I mean, it's been really helpful for us. Okay. So here's my first question. It's the obvious one, obviously. What's it like being married to Rick Warren?
Well, I'll tell you this. It's anything but boring. The guy is just amazing. I don't know anybody quite like him. I had never met anybody like him when we met when we were 17, and I still have never met anybody quite like him. He is one of those people that he's a creative. He really is kind of a genius, and so no one day looks like the day before, and that means there's never any opportunity to get bored because I never know what the next day is going to look like. But he's funny. He's very much the same, the way he is in public is the way he is in private. He's funny. He's warm. He's affectionate. He's an idea a minute. He's got more lists of things to do than 10 people could do in a lifetime. He is amazing. He's really he drives me crazy. Absolutely flat out stinking crazy because we're so different. But but he really is the same in private that he is in public.
Well, I got to tell you, we are thankful for him, big time. And I was telling this to a same friend of mine yesterday. I said, I really don't know where the American church would be, honestly, had we not all been given purpose-driven church. And so we know it takes a lot of time and a lot of family time away during that time. So thank you for giving him to us during that time.
I'm glad I can share him. He's God has given him some, like I said, some unique gifts, I think, for this time in history. And it's been really an amazing honor to walk together through life and ministry for 42 years last week. Last week was our 42nd anniversary. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. That's pretty cool. Well, you grew up a pastor's kid. So you have a lot of evidence, and that's want to know why. Where are those names at in this book? But you have a lot of evidence. What was that like, Kay, growing up a pastor's kid? So you've seen this all your life, basically.
It's really all I know because I did grow up in a pastor's home, and then I married a pastor, and so I don't know what normal life is like. I really only know, a pastor's home. And I grew up. Rick and I were both pastors' kids, so that's one of the things that we share that actually makes our life, I think, work because we come from similar backgrounds, same denomination, at the same time, parents who had very similar values. We grew up in a time when it was extremely conservative in the church, and we both had those expectations on us of, you have to do this because you're the pastor's kid. But the reverse of that was, you can't do that because you're the pastor's kid. And in small churches where everybody knows your business, everybody knows everything about your life. And so that was hard. That was challenging. Yeah. But I think because both of our parents had strong marriages and were really people of great integrity, so that the lives they lived in the public, in our church, and the way that they lived in home was the same. So even though there was the pressure of living in a fishbowl, which was particularly hard for me just because of my personality, but even though we had that pressure, we had parents who lived very consistent lives. And so we didn't struggle, either of us, with the, the pain that a lot of pastors' kids do of seeing how their parents act and behave at church, and it's completely different from that at home. And so there was a consistency that set us up both in the way that we love God and in our interest in being in ministry. It was not this concept of like, oh my gosh, that's the last thing in the world I would ever do. No, it was actually something that appealed to us because we had seen our parents live it well.
Wow, which is pretty neat, by the way. And it's kind of one of those things you talk about it in the book is also as well. Let's go back a few years, or maybe a lot of years.
Okay, probably.
What do you remember about being a youth pastor's wife? Because Rick started out as that at one time in his life there.
I don't think I was good at it. I don't think I was good at it. I really
Why
wasn't.
Why is that, though? That's pretty interesting.
Well, we were both still in college. We were young. We were 21 when we got married. but we got engaged at 19. Wow. So he was going to college and was a part-time youth pastor in an inner city church about 50 miles away from college. So he had to, travel to his weekend job. And so I had the year we were engaged, he was a youth pastor, and then the year after we got married. So for, basically 2 years, I don't know. It was all too much for me. I think kind of where I was very young. I didn't feel very confident in who I was and my gifts. I didn't necessarily feel like I had anything much to offer. That was a period of my life that I was really struggling with self-identity and self-confidence. And he was a kid magnet. The kids, they loved him. It's all the things that he is today. Yeah. So imagine him, he's 63 now. Imagine him at 19. I mean, if he has few filters now, he had almost no filters then. He would do goofy things, crazy things, and the kids, they loved it. They just thought he was the best. He was the Pied Piper, and so when he would talk to them, to the athletes and to the popular kids, he made being a Christian really cool.
Wow.
So it was cool to be a Christian and to be on fire for Christ in his youth group.
Wow.
But I was shy and I was quiet and I was very reserved. And here he was just all over the place with all these students, and they were in our home and they came late at night and they stayed. And I don't know. It was hard for me. I don't think I did a really good job.
Wow.
I was too insecure. I was too insecure at the time.
That's very interesting because I just cannot see that, by the way. I thought one of your quotes was very interesting. So it's on page 145 of the book here. You write this: resilience starts with the decision to take care of yourself. Do you think resilience is a characteristic key that pastors' wives need to have?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when people, sometimes people say, if you have one message to give, what's your one message? And I know people expect me to pull out some, deep theological truth.
Spiritual.
Some obscure point from Ezekiel or something. But what I always say is take care of yourself. I didn't understand it. I didn't see that much growing up. I don't think Rick's parents did either. It just wasn't a time in which you talked about taking care of yourself. That just was not even a concept that anybody even knew about. And then because we had so many difficulties early in our relationship and in our marriage, and then tried so hard to be, the best pastor's wife, and that's a losing proposition. I mean, it's not a worthy goal because it's just not ever going to happen. But I've just learned through these years that if I'm going to last, which is my goal, my goal is to die with my boots on. I'm going to keep working for Jesus till he comes. And so if that's my goal, that's the end in mind, then I've got to put processes and principles and procedures even in place that will help me get to my goal. And that's where taking care of ourselves really comes in. And I think that when you get married, this is particularly true for married people, you have this idea that your spouse is going to take care of you. If you're a man, you think your wife is going to take care of you to some degree. If you're a wife, you think your husband's going to take care of you to a certain degree. Then you get in a church and you think that congregation is going to take care of you, or the elders, or that there's people looking out for you. They're going to take care of you. And the reality is, they're not going to do it the way that you want and that you need. Disappointment comes in relationships. And if you're looking for your husband to meet your needs, take care of you, make sure that you're growing spiritually, and it isn't going to happen. It's not his job. And so for me to really recognize and take ownership that if I want to last in ministry, if I want to be spiritually healthy, if I want to be emotionally healthy, if I want to be physically healthy, those are decisions that I have to claim for myself, and I have to make sure that they happen. I mean, just think of this really practically. If I want to be spiritually healthy, there's no way that it's Rick's job to stand over me every day and say, hey, have you had your quiet time? Or are you memorizing scripture? You know, are you saying yes to God? Of course not. He can't even do that for me. But if I want to be spiritually healthy and have resilience to last through all these decades of ministry, I have to decide that I'm going to be as close to Jesus as I can possibly be. And emotionally, Rick, I mean, the wounds that have come into my life, he can't fix those. He can't fix what's going on and where I'm broken in my heart and my soul. There's nothing he can do that. All he can do is support me. So I have to make the decision to do whatever it takes to heal those broken places in me, to get help, to get therapy, to be in a small group. That's my decision. And physically, and this is, you know, this is what I find is that when you talk about being healthy spiritually and you talk about being healthy emotionally, most people are like, yes, that's what I need. That's what I want. But then you switch over and start talking about taking care of our bodies. Romans 12:1, really offering our bodies and
they're like, no,
now you are meddling. Get out of here. I don't want to talk about it. Shut up. I'm going to eat my sugar. I'm going to eat my donuts. I'm going to eat my coffee. I'm going to eat my, you know, scalloped potatoes with, you know, 10 pounds of cheese on it. And Christians, particularly I think evangelicals, just kind of they don't want to talk about that. But the reality is, part of what happens to us the longer we're in ministry, our body starts to wear down. And if we're not eating right, and we're not sleeping right, and we're not exercising, and we're not taking the best care of these, you only get one body. I mean, you only get one. And we act as though it's expendable, and it's not. And so taking responsibility spiritually and emotionally and physically for ourselves is what then builds resilience, so that when the wheels fall off the bus, so that when diagnoses come your way that you weren't expecting, when, you know, your kid goes off in a different direction, your husband has an affair, when stuff goes wrong, if you've built resilience, you can make it. You've got the tools to make it. But if you are lacking or lapsed in any one of those areas, you're going to struggle. You're going to struggle. You're going to struggle. And since you know struggle is inevitable, boy, I'm having trouble talking this morning.
No, you're fine. It's Monday.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you for that excuse. Since we know struggle is inevitable, why not be as prepared as possible? To me, it's just reasonable. It just makes sense.
Now, being a pastor's wife is tough. Being a pastor is tough too. I hear you talk about the whole resilience thing, and I'm going amen, and amen, basically. But has that been difficult for you at times to go, okay, man, God, you've called Rick and I to this, and has it been hard sometimes to not want to quit? Has there been those times you just said, I want out of this?
Yes, I wanted him to be anything but a pastor. You know, if he'd been a plumber or a painter or a pharmacist, I don't know, anything but a pastor. Absolutely. There have been those moments. And that's where I learned how important resilience is. I mean, I learned how much I needed to take care of myself because I wasn't able to do it. And in those places where I wasn't able to do it, it exposed the gaps. And that's when I got serious about taking that ownership of taking care of myself spiritually and emotionally and physically. Yeah, there've been a lot of times that have been really hard. And sometimes it wasn't because of stuff that was happening at the church. It wasn't necessarily because we were under fire. There have been those times, but it wasn't necessarily because we were under fire from people in the church as much as the struggle in our marriage. Or our son, Matthew, when he was alive and was living with mental illness, or I was going through a period of real deep healing of some wounds when I was 40. That's when I decided to confront the wounds of having been sexually molested as a child. And so because I was so focused on, you know, struggles in our marriage, struggles with our child, struggles with healing broken places in me, ministry felt impossible. how can I go meet the needs of other people? How can I be so engaged in what other people might need in this moment when I am just like this one raw nerve?
Yeah.
And so for us, I think those have been the times that we've wanted to quit.
Wow.
Sometimes people face a lot of criticism, face a lot of opposition, and that can make you want to quit too. That can make you just feel like this is the most thankless job in the world, because here you're, you're pouring yourself out on behalf of students or their parents or other people in your church, only to get hit with criticism and people who think you're, doing it wrong and somebody could do it better than you and all that stuff. And that's when you just want to go, okay, that's it. The cost is too high. The cost is just too high. And now, I really feel for that. I feel for that.
Now, you live life in a fishbowl. We all do. Yours is a bigger fishbowl.
I've got like the aquarium of the
You got the aquarium.
Yeah.
How have you been able to survive living in the aquarium? And what advice would you give to a new pastor's wife who's just coming into this in their first year or two? How can they survive?
Yep. Great question. And everybody asks, and listen to the first part where I talked about taking care of yourself. That's one. But secondly is to really accept and understand that you cannot walk on water. I think everybody who goes into ministry
thinks they can.
has at some point that thought in your head of, I can do this. I can do this. I can be the best. I can be the best pastor. I can be the best youth pastor. I can be the best pastor's wife. I can be the best Bible study leader. I can do this. I can do this. And then when the congregation has these expectations that you can walk on water and you are playing along with it and you think, oh, I can do this, it's a recipe for disaster. It is completely a recipe for disaster. You cannot walk on water. You cannot balance on top of a tiny little pedestal if anybody wants to put you up on one.
Yeah.
And again, I learned this the hard way because because of growing up in the homes that we did, where you didn't talk about problems. And so, of course, we had problems, but you didn't talk about them. So I learned how to bury it, how to stuff it down. And then when we got married and had marriage problems, I didn't know what to do with it. So I was faking it. And here I was trying to be the youth pastor's wife. And then from there, we went to seminary and then starting Saddleback. And it was the idea of, I've got to fake it because everybody thinks I'm perfect. Everybody thinks that I know all of the Bible answers. Everybody thinks I never struggle, that I always love my husband, that I never get mad at my kids. And the reality is none of that. And so you have to learn really pretty early on, just forget the walk on water stuff. You're just a human being deeply in need of God's grace and his mercy every single day. Don't try to be perfect. You have to find this fine balance because we are leaders and we're in that leadership position because supposedly we have a solid walk with Christ that enables us to tell somebody else, hey, follow me as I follow Christ. But at the same time, as Paul balanced that, where he said that, but then he also said, you know what? I despaired of life. I was so depressed. I despaired of life. Or our hearts have been broken. And so he was so real about the things he was feeling. And yet at the same time, he was healthy enough that he could say to people, follow me as I follow Christ. So in ministry, it's figuring out how to live as a human being with brokenness, with needs, with failings, with struggles, and yet be healthy enough emotionally and spiritually so that you can actually still say to people, follow me as I follow Christ. And that starts with, I'm not perfect. I don't get it right all the time. You live with the humility that says, hey, you know what? I'm going to mess up sometimes. But when I do, I'm going to own it. I'm going to ask forgiveness. I'm going to grow. And that enables us, I think, then to be able to say, hey, follow me as I follow Christ.
Yeah, it's interesting. You guys are very authentic in the book here, and I can't say that over and over again. What would you tell a pastor's wife or a youth pastor's wife for our context here who, man, they get terminated? Those things happen in church life, unfortunately. What advice do you give youth pastors and pastors' wife who have to walk through that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it hurts. It hurts, and I don't think I don't think anybody ever gets let go without pain. It's always painful. Yeah. I think what you have to be careful of is to watch for bitterness, because, you know, one of two things has happened. If you've been let go, one of two things has probably happened. Either one, you really weren't either meeting the expectations of that church, or maybe perhaps you made some mistakes that were determined that they wanted to let you go because of them. And or secondly, there just wasn't a good fit, and maybe you didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but the fit isn't quite right, and the church leadership has decided, you know, that you're going to be let go. And in one case, you can say, okay, we blew it, we made some mistakes, we made some errors, okay, I get that, and maybe it was justified. The other situation, it's harder, because if you feel like, hey, I've done everything I know to do, I was living with integrity, I was leading the best I knew how, I was loving the students, I was loving the congregation, and they still let me go, that's harder. It's much, much harder. Either way, it hurts. Either way, you've got to kind of do some business with God that says, you know, ultimately at the end of the day, Mina, we are God's. We are His to do with as He chooses. And we don't get to determine a lot of that. Our job is to live with our hands open and to say, God, you can lead me where you want to lead me. You can put me at the front of the line. You can put me at the back of the line. You can take me out of the line entirely. At the end of the day, I belong to you. And I don't like the way this happened. This feels unjust, or this feels harsh, or this feels unfair. It feels like we've given so much and now we're being treated like this. So you got to start with, you belong to Jesus Christ. And ultimately, He can do with your life whatever He chooses. And then secondly, you have to go to that place of what I call radical forgiveness. And this is really hard. We talk a good game about forgiveness, you know, and we preach great messages and we teach great Bible studies about forgiveness. But when the rubber meets the road and we're actually in that position of needing to forgive other people, the way they've treated us, the way they've treated our spouse or our kids, that is the hardest thing that God ever asks us to do. So you've got to settle that you belong to Jesus, and He can do with your life whatever He likes, that He will be in charge of it. He will work through the details. You can trust Him. And then secondly, you're going to have to do that business of radical forgiveness, because to let bitterness grow in your soul, bitterness has this way of shrinking our soul to like the size of a pea. I mean, you might start with this wide, expansive soul that's growing, that's acknowledging God. You're learning, you're growing in Christ likeness. You're finding spiritual truth. You're receiving the meat of His word and giving it back. But bitterness has this way of cutting all that out, and it makes your soul just shrink and shrink and shrink. And untended souls with bitterness growing rampantly eventually become about this big. And then you have nothing to give. You have nothing to give back in your family. You have nothing to give in ministry, and you actually become an impediment to the kingdom. So settling who you belong to and whose you are and who has ownership over your life, and then making a commitment to walk through your life practicing radical forgiveness. Those are the two things I think that carry any of us through those moments when, you know what? You get criticism, you get laid off, you get terminated, you get let go, and your world comes crashing in.
Yeah. I got to tell you, every time you say radical forgiveness, I want to stand up and like shout. And I've heard you say that before in another interview, and I have used that over and over again. And I got to tell you, I mean, it works. It really does work. And I just thank you for just sharing that. You've discussed, and we talked about in our last interview, your worst day. And unfortunately, I've had to walk through it as well, and losing a child, and you have also. How did you get through your worst day?
All I can say is God got us through somehow, because I wasn't even sure I wanted to survive, that day. To lose Matthew to suicide was crushing. It just, there just aren't any words. I think losing a child, you and I talked about this before, there is no loss quite like that of losing a child.
Nothing close.
No,
Yeah.
there isn't. There isn't.
Yeah.
I think you lose a part of yourself when a child dies. And we had known that it was a strong possibility for many years because Matthew had been severely mentally ill and struggled for a very long time, lived with suicidal ideation, had made attempts, was a very, very bleak period of years. And so we knew that the possibility was there that he might end up taking his life. So it wasn't shocking in the sense of, oh, we had no idea he was, even talking about it.
Yeah.
It was just shocking that it was that particular day. I think the day that it actually happened, it was like, no, not today. We just had dinner together. We just talked about what you're going to do on the weekend. No, you've got a date. No, you're getting a new iPhone tomorrow. What? How could you die today? And we clung to each other. Our small group came, our family that lived in the area. So we were surrounded by family and friends and the Lord. And that's the only way I know that we got through it.
Well, I got to tell you.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I cut you off. That I and others definitely prayed for you guys during that time.
Thanks.
And there is nothing worse. And just thank you for sharing that with us throughout the last few years here, because it's helped a lot of people. Yeah. Mental illness, if we could talk about that. Why do you think it's so hard for the local church to really get involved with it, to own it, to get plugged in with it? I think we made a lot of strides in local church, obviously. Why is it so hard for us to accept that people do come with mental illness? We all probably do have something. Why is that difficult, you think?
I think historically, I think there's a historical reason and a theological reason. I think the theological reason is a misunderstanding of Scripture. And I think it was the theology that shaped history. And so because people early on didn't really understand mental illness, and they thought all mental illness was demon possession, so that there was a spiritual cause, and that it was then on the person who was struggling to do something different, to pray more, to confess, to add scripture reading, to do penance. I mean, whatever. There was a theological, I think, misunderstanding of the fact that we are a whole, that we are a body, mind, and we didn't understand that concept in scripture, that you could be ill in any part of yourself, and that made it an illness, not a character issue or not a spiritual issue per se, like you were failing in your Christian walk. And so that theology then drove the way we've treated people living with mental illness for centuries. And, when you go back and you look, even, for instance, we were talking about suicide. If you go back and you look at the way people who killed themselves were treated through the centuries, it's abhorrent. It's horrific, the things that were done to people who took their own lives, and so that has continued. And then I think when back in the 1800s, late 1800s, when Freud came along, and Christians became very suspicious of Freud and his ideas, and so then you start throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and before you know it, you really end up with some really mixed up both theology and practice of how to care for people living with mental illness. What I love that I'm seeing now is that more and more people are understanding that your brain is a part of your body. And just like your kidneys, something can go wrong with your kidneys, something can go wrong with your thyroid, something can go wrong with a bone, something can go wrong with your brain. And when it does, then that's called a mental illness. And when we start accepting that the brain is part of the body and stuff can go wrong there, just like it can anywhere else, then I think Christians are more likely to say, oh, well, mental illness is an illness. Now, that becomes sort of a double-edged sword, because then people say, oh, so a person has a mental illness. Oh, well, we need to that's the world of the medical professionals. This has nothing to do with the church. That's just the medical professionals. This is a medical illness. We don't know what to do with that. So you go over there, but because we don't really have anything to do with that. But when we shift the emphasis to, no, this is a person with a mental illness. If you say this is a person with a mental illness, then you want to go and just work in the medical professional. But if you say this is a person who has a mental illness, then suddenly the church goes, oh, we know what to do for persons. We know how to help persons. We know how to treat people who are ill. We know how to do that. So I think it's kind of this double-edged sword. Yes, I'm so glad that people are understanding that mental illness is an illness.
Yeah.
It's real. It's common. 60 million Americans right now are living with a mental illness.
With some form of it, yeah.
Absolutely. So you either are yourself, or you're living, or you know somebody who is, or you love somebody. So it's very common. It's very treatable. But also the church has something very significant to offer. We know how to care for people when they're struggling.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Questions here, and I'm done. I thank you so much for your time. Do you ever think to yourself, man, you and Rick are some ways, in a lot of ways, this may be overwhelming to you in some ways here, that you guys are a part of American church history, your legacy in a large regard, and what you guys have done there at Saddleback. Does that ever overwhelm you at all by any chance?
I can say honestly, we never get over that. And others have said that. No. And if we, try to just look through a lens of reality, we're cognizant of that. And it is the most humbling thought. It's just the most humbling thought that God would take two little small town people, just kind of average people, and decide to do something in and through us at Saddleback. I don't even have words. It's
just amazing reading your story.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It is. I mean, that two people got in a car and drove across the country to California.
Yeah.
Do you ever look back and go, wow?
Yeah,
that was pretty extraordinary.
Well, and Rick, I mean, I knew that there was something extraordinary about Rick when I met him at 17. Like I said, he's the most, we're all unique, but he's the most unique person I know. I knew God was going to do something in and through him. I just didn't know what it was going to be. And I didn't know the magnitude or the scope. That I had absolutely no idea. But when we started Saddleback and he was talking about, I feel like God's given me this vision that we're going to have 20,000 members by our 20th anniversary. And I'm just like, sure, why not? I mean, that was I couldn't even think in those terms. So sure, why not? And so I knew it, but as it's happened, it's just been thrilling. It really has been a sacred privilege. I know that sounds cheesy, but it has been a sacred privilege to serve at Saddleback for 37 years, to see what all God's done. We're the most privileged people I can think of. So
it's been cool to watch. It's been very cool to watch. Last question here. Sacred privilege. Did you say everything that you wanted to say in this?
Oh, great question. No, that's always the problem with writing. Turn it in and then you go, wait, I left this out. Wait, how did I leave that part out? Oh my goodness. And I think if anything, I think I would have included more about our marriage if I had, if I were doing it again. Publishers like you to write a certain amount of pages, and that's really all they want you to write. That's what they've contracted with. So you got to fit it all within those pages. And so to fit in all the other things that I felt were really important to share, I had to cut back on some of the things about our marriage. But I think hearing about our marriage would encourage a lot of people, because we should not be married. We should not still be married. We have had such a tumultuous relationship. We are vastly different. I think particularly in the earlier years, in our immaturity, in our sinfulness, in our weakness, we came to the edge so many times of saying, that's it. I cannot stay married to you. You have hurt my feelings. You have broken my heart. I don't like you. You are difficult. I mean, but this is what we'd say about each other. This was the mutual. We were, as I say in the book, because we were having a lot of struggles in every area: communication, sex, arguing. We didn't know how to we didn't know how to argue. We argued about our in-laws. We argued about money. Everything there was to argue about, we argued, and we didn't argue well. And so there were so many times, really. I can look back in my journals, both of us in our journals can look back, where we would get in the car, go drive just somewhere to kind of calm down, get our heads straight. And I'm pouring out in my journal all the things that make me mad, or that I don't like, or that I wish were different, or, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And then you sit in that silence, and the Holy Spirit starts talking to you, and he says things like, hey, I get it. I get it. But girl, you said this, and you were very selfish about that. And
Wow.
when you said that like that, you stuck an arrow in your husband's heart. And when you behave like this, and all of a sudden you just start going, oh, God, I am a sinner in this relationship.
Yeah.
And then he would bring to my mind the faces of my kids, because Rick and I we really believe we made a vow to God. We made a vow before God that we were going to be married to each other until one of us died. And we would tell our kids when they were little, and they would sometimes hear some of these arguments and this conflict, and they would get scared, and they, Mommy, are you and Daddy going to get a divorce? And we would say, no, we are not. We will work it out. And then when I'm, off in the car having these moments of, I can't do this, this is just too hard, and the Holy Spirit's talking to me, showing me my part, my sinfulness.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, I would see the faces of my kids, and I could never envision going to my children after I had reassured them that Daddy and I would always work it out. I could not envision the moment in which I had to gather my children close to me and say, I have to tell you that Daddy and I cannot work it out. I couldn't do that to them.
Wow.
And so what has kept me married has been the vow that I took before God.
Wow.
And the vow that I took to be faithful to my husband, and the vow that I took to my children that their daddy and I would always work it out. And those things have kept us committed. I really believe most people would have divorced years ago, because it's just, we're not an easy fit. We are not an easy fit together. Even after 42 years, we are not always an easy fit together. We're not. And, but we have learned, we have built through blood, sweat, and tears. We have built a rock solid relationship where I cannot imagine my life without this man, and he can't imagine his life without me. And just the other day, my daughter said to me, Mama, thank you for modeling a marriage of covenant to God, to each other, and to your children. Thank you for modeling that for us. It's worth it. It's been worth it.
Well, man, I got to tell you, the time is always fast when I get the privilege of talking to you and just interviewing you here. And it's one of those things where interviewing you once would have been an honor and great. Twice, I'm going, man, God, thank you for the double blessing.
Lina.
I mean,
you're so
seriously.
Kind.
I mean,
we're going to have to meet in person one of these days, okay?
I know. We got to do it
hugs.
here.
I got to meet your wife.
You got it. This is an awesome book. I got to tell everyone, are you especially a family, please go out and get it. It's one of those books that I really do think, man, it will help you through your marriage. And I don't think it's just for pastors' wives, by the way, guys. I think it's for men too. Also, because I've read it twice and you can too. So thank you so much, Kay. I appreciate it so much today.
Thanks. Good to be with your audience. Thanks.
All right.